Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we're going to take a very deep look. Today you have to put on your thinking caps. It won't be too hard. Don't get scared right away. But we do need to think, because we're going to be talking about Einstein and God. Well, those are two big subjects over here, and trying to put them together is going to be a real issue. But stay tuned, look inside it, and think about these ideas. And they're not going to be too hard, so really don't get scared. But I think you're going to appreciate some really appreciative, deep philosophy. Now, Albert Einstein, the world-renowned physicist, put forth his theories of relativity in the early 1900s. Now, a half-century later, scientists were still devising experiments to corroborate his theories. That is, what Einstein understood with intuition, the average scientist needed high-tech experiments to confirm. Today, Einstein's perception of the universe stands as the pillar of some of the most fundamental aspects of physics. It is with little wonder that the word Einstein has become synonymous with genius. Here was a man who envisioned revolutionary ideas which other scientists could not even conceive of. In a sense, Einstein was more than just a genius. We're accustomed to thinking of a genius in terms of someone who comes up with revolutionary ways of dealing with tangible ideas. A method of prefabricating houses, a lotion that cleans any stain off any material, a plane that can take off as a helicopter. But coming up with ideas which takes others years to grasp, and which ultimately turn out to be the entire foundation of a branch of science, is beyond our simple understanding of genius. Out of a lack of an adequate term, we will simply call it beyond human genius. Although it is generally known that Einstein is responsible for the formula E=mc2, and that he is the father of the atom bomb, the average person knows very little about what his theories say. Probably because if scientists have had a hard time understanding his theory, the average person has surely found them incomprehensible. And rightly so. Some of Einstein's theories seem to defy common sense and logic. However, if approached in small, limited doses, it is possible to capture a glimpse of something that may otherwise remain incomprehensible. It is in this vein that this article will touch on some of the hair-raising ideas presented by Einstein. First, one should note that the theory of relativity actually consists of two theories: special relativity, dealing with high-speed motion, and general relativity, dealing with gravity. The two technical differences between the two theories, however, are beyond the scope of and irrelevant to this article. This article will therefore simply refer to them as the theory of relativity. One of the great puzzles confronting Einstein and his contemporary was the consistency of the speed of light. Experiments showed that light, which travels at 186,000 miles per second, maintained the same speed through empty space, no matter how fast the observer was traveling towards or away from the light source, and no matter how fast the light source was traveling in relation to the observer. Logically, that doesn't seem to make any sense. If one stands on front end of a train moving at 50 miles per hour and throws a ball forward at 10 miles per hour, someone standing on the tracks in front of the train should get hit with a ball flying at 60 miles per hour. This is simple mathematics and it holds up in practice. The ball will travel at 60 miles per hour. The opposite is also true. If the individual on the track throws the ball at you, you will be hit with the impact of a ball flying at 60 miles per hour. Now, for some strange reason, however, when it comes to light, the simple business of combining speeds just doesn't seem to work. If you were to travel towards the sun at half the speed of light and measure the speed of the sun's rays coming towards you, you would find the light traveling no faster than 186,000 miles per second. On the other hand, if one were to travel away from the sun at half the speed of light, one would find the sun's rays coming in from behind him at no less than 186,000 miles per second. Furthermore, if someone were to fly towards him at close to the speed of light with an open flashlight, he would find the light coming at him no faster than 186,000 miles per second. If you think that's confusing, well, try this. If the same beam of light were to be measured by three different observers, one traveling against the light at high speed, one traveling away from the light, and one standing still, all three observers would record the light as traveling no faster or slower than 186,000 miles per second. This is more than just confusing. This is downright disturbing. But Einstein somehow saw the logic in all of this. What set Einstein apart from the rest was, while other scientists racked their brains on chopping up old theories and formulating new ones to make sense out of the seemingly illogical behavior of nature, Einstein intuitively understood that some of our most basic perception of nature are out of whack. Einstein realized that there are no absolutes in our universe. Everything is relative. It is easier to understand this concept with speed. If you're traveling on a highway at 50 miles per hour next to another car traveling at the same speed, relative to the other car, you're not moving. In fact, if you pulled up close to the other guy, you could pass an object to him just as easily as if you were standing still. Yet to someone standing at the side of the road, the other guy is moving at 50 miles per hour. So when you ask how fast is the other guy moving, well, the answer depends on who you're asking. The genius of relativity, however, is not that simple. Relativity says that just as speed is not absolute, neither are time and distance. Meaning what one may call 1 hour may actually be under certain circumstances 2.5 hours to someone else. Likewise, lengths or distances may change relative to moving observers. Ultimately, you wind up with an altered perception of speed. That is, measuring speed is nothing more than measuring the time it takes to go from point A to point B. But what if your clock ran slower than someone else's? Your perception how fast you're going would be altered. Well, by the same token, if for some reason you measured the distance between New York and California as only 500 miles, you would conclude that you must have been driving awfully slow to take 5 days to get from coast to coast. Relativity says that when an object moves, especially at high speeds, time and distances become distorted. An hour isn't an hour anymore, and a mile isn't a mile. As in the case of the ball thrown at the train, it's all relative. That is, how much time something took or how far you had traveled, all depends on which observer you ask. And no matter how diverse the opinions you'll get, none of them will necessarily be wrong. Again, the mathematical and physical technicalities of exactly how this happens is beyond the scope. The point here is simply that Einstein understood that the consistency of the speed of light has something to do with movement, which distorts time and distance. But now you're probably thinking this business distorting time and distance may sound impressive theoretically, but in reality it's just a lot of gibberish. Let's face it, an hour is an hour. Wrong. An hour is not an hour. In confirmation of Einstein's theory, tests have been performed which prove that time can literally go slower. Einstein's theory of relativity says that the faster you move, the slower time will go. Literally, that is, by moving your watch, will actually go slower than someone else's. But the relative slow speeds at which people move on a daily basis, time differences are negligible. At high speeds, however, the difference becomes somewhat pronounced. If one could get into a spaceship and travel close to the speed of light for 20 years, he might age only several months without a facelift, while his friends back on Earth would be 20 years older. This aspect of the slowing of time was tested with highly accurate atomic clocks. Synchronized atomic clocks were flown around on planes and later compared to clocks left behind on Earth. The clocks from the planes were slower by very small amounts than the ones left on Earth by precisely the amounts predicted by Einstein. Decades after Einstein postulated his theories, another test was performed with subatomic particles. There are some subatomic particles which are known to live for only fractions of a second. If these particular particles could be accelerated to speeds close to that of light, scientists reasoned they should, according to Einstein's theories, live longer. Using particles accelerators, scientists hurl subatomic particles around at very high speeds. Sure enough, they live several times their normal lifespans, in precise agreement with Einstein's theories. If you don't quite see the relationship between speed and the slowing of time, you're not alone. There are many others just like you. In fact, there are people smarter than you and me who don't see the relationship at first glance. There are even people who don't see the relationship after the fourth or fifth glance. But that doesn't necessarily make them stupid. It simply means they're not Einstein. The brilliance of Einstein's theories was evident not so much in that others didn't come up with them first. The brilliance was in that even after Einstein explained the theories, people found them difficult to grasp. Of course, there are plenty of others who have all sorts of theories that nobody understands. The Big Bang was supposed to explain the birth and evolution of the universe, which, according to more recent observations, it far from does. The world was supposed to come to an end several times, and California was supposed to slide into the ocean. But Einstein's theories are not quite on the same level. Apparently, Einstein perceived some highly sophisticated phenomena which were eventually confirmed, but only after decades of high-tech development. That's brilliance. How does all this relate to God? Well, sometimes people have questions about God runs the world. How can a righteous person suffer? How can a wicked person prosper? How could the Holocaust have happened? Although satisfactorily addressed by some scholars, these questions continue to linger on in the minds of many. Occasionally, people have problems on a more immediate and personal level than they find difficult to comprehend, which sometimes leads to reservation and doubt as to whether there is justice in the world. Although there's nothing wrong with trying to understand why things happen, there's certainly something wrong with the conclusion reached by some people. Doubt sets in with the notion that if it made any sense, I would have understood it. And since I find it incomprehensible, there must be something wrong with what's happening. Not necessarily so. Einstein was a mere human being, yet he entertained thoughts which the average person finds to an extent incomprehensible. The fact that you may not fully understand the theory of relativity does not mean there is something wrong with the theory. It's been proven to be correct. And even if you spent a year trying to understand how speed slows down time and still finds it difficult to grasp, that still would mean there's something wrong with the theory. It would only mean that your comprehension is not quite at Einstein's level, and most people readily admit to and understand this. Yet when it comes to how God runs the world, people's logic sometimes seems to go awry. God is many times more intelligent than Einstein ever was. Well, he created Einstein and the laws of nature which support the theory of relativity. How can anyone believe that although he cannot comprehend the thoughts of a mere human being, Einstein, he should be able to understand every minute detail of God runs the world? And sometimes there are the more enlightened among us who understand that a situation is beyond our grasp, but only because it hasn't been explained to us. That's not necessarily so either. If the theory of relativity remains incomprehensible to people who have heard it explained over and over, what makes anyone so sure that they can understand the reason why certain things happen even if God was to personally explain it to them? Isn't it logical to assume that when dealing with intelligence literally infinitely greater than that of Einstein, you're bound to run into things which are incomprehensible whether or not they're explained? And that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the way the world is run, any more than there's something wrong with the theory of relativity. It only means that our ability to comprehend certain matters sometimes falls short. Please note that I am not rendering decisions on when one should or shouldn't ask questions. What I am pointing out is that full comprehension of everything under and certainly above the sun is not humanly possible. Believing that one is wise enough to understand everything is in the confidence of a fool. Understanding that God's wisdom can at times make a mortal feel like a fool can make a wise person out of a foolish mortal. So I don't think that was that difficult. If you say you don't understand it, well, then you're with the most of us. But understand that there's just certain things we just don't understand, and that's not too weird and too worry. That's actually pretty interesting, because let me explain something to you, that since the world is so deep and so hard to understand, the truth of the matter is, you could say, is that it's really a wonder that we understand anything. So if you really understand that, hey, there's so many deep theories in the world and there's something we can understand, that makes something very interesting, that when we do understand something of the universe, that makes it a very beautiful and understanding experience. Well, I know that people have a little bit, they're scratching their head about Einstein. I know it's a little bit harder, so therefore what happens when you get overworked? Well, you go on a vacation. So of course we'll continue with our series. We have little snippets about Jewish communities in the far-flung areas of the world. There are Jewish communities there, and we're going to take you to one now halfway across the world, the Hong Kong Jewish community. 70 years ago, a bareback rider with a visiting Russian circus gave birth to a boy on Hong Kong Island. The boy was given his official name by the visiting rabbi of the synagogue. So the entire Jewish community, then about 500, celebrated in the garden of the Jewish Recreation Club, along with tigers, trapeze artists, jugglers, and clowns. While this was hardly the most profound event during the 150-year history of Judaism in Hong Kong, it was certainly the most bizarre. Hong Kong's Jewish community has always been staid and businesslike, reflecting the most solemn membership of the territory. Yet, if not bizarre, the genesis of today's Jewish community was ever a colorful one. The first settlers were Sephardic Jews from Baghdad, and their influence remains today. The following settlers came from around the world, including China itself. Some of these settlers came along the Silk Road from families which presumably did business with Marco Polo. Many Jewish settlers in China had suffered from pogroms and persecution, but at no time has anti-Semitism ever reared its head in Hong Kong. Its expatriate population comes from virtually every country in the world. Ironically, Lord Kaduri was the very first Hong Kong-born citizen to become a nobleman of Great Britain. Lord Kaduri's father was one of the Iraqi Jews descended from Asian agents for nomadic shepherds. With the Sassoon family, they were the first to settle in Hong Kong. A rare memoir published by Lord Kaduri relates how these Baghdad Jews, originally sent to exile in Babylon with the diaspora, had been sent as business agents to the Far East during the 19th century. While the Rothschild family had settled throughout Europe, the Baghdad Jew, who could speak Arabic as well as Hebrew and European language, was of great use throughout India, the East Indies, and finally China. Sir Eli Kaduri went to China in 1880 as a clerk, but after a dispute with his boss about a bottle of cleansing fluid, lost his job and came to Hong Kong. That bottle is still part of the Kaduri coat of arms. Sir Eli came to Hong Kong around 1890. Lord Kaduri was born in 1899. His business instincts were so acute that other Sephardic Jews used Hong Kong as one of their regular ports of call. Arabic-speaking visiting rabbis, usually from the Middle East, held services in traditional Orthodox manner till 1902. As the colonial service did not classify their citizens by religion, nobody knows how many British Jews worked in the colony. The first Jewish governor, however, ruled about the same period. Most interestingly, Jewish scholars came to Hong Kong to do research on the so-called Chinese Jews. The research continues to this day. The Jewish Historical Society, under such scholars Dennis Leventhal, produces volumes on the various groups of Jews who lived in China and then emigrated to Hong Kong. There were three strings. First, Jews who today look totally Chinese. Various theories exist about their origin, but Leventhal feels that most were originally agents of Middle Eastern or European companies trading with the Far East. Marco Polo mentions their presence, he says, and one might surmise that over the centuries they intermarried with Muslims. Their children were brought up in communities sharing a form of Jewish belief. These communities exist throughout China. Even today, remnants of medieval synagogues are found in the country. Frequently in Hong Kong, Chinese Jews come to services claiming their origin back 8th or 9th centuries. The second emigration was of Russian Jews who went to China after the pogroms of the early 19th century and during the First World War. Living in Harbin and Tianjin, where synagogues still exist, they emigrated to Shanghai and after World War II to Hong Kong, where they still live and prosper. These were the Jews who until 30 years ago made up a fairly prosperous and stable community. Their religious practices were virtually all Orthodox, so the synagogue served the entire community. Visits from rabbis, scholars, and yes, the occasional visiting Russian Jewish circus were interesting. But in no time did the Jewish community separate itself from the British colonial society of which it was a part. During the past 30 years, an entirely different Jewish community has come here. More transient, these American and West European Jews are in business, law, and engineering. Few of them see Hong Kong as a home, but during their 3-4 year stays, they have an influence on religious practices. A permanent Orthodox Rebbe is attached to the synagogue. Religious education is given at the Jewish club, and bar mitzvahs are a regular occurrence at the synagogue. The most striking figure is in the divergence of national representation. A recent poll at the Jewish club found 38% from the U.S., 16% from Israel, and 23% from the United Kingdom, with the rest from virtually every European country, as well as Africa, Iraq, Lebanon, and China. Never estimated are the number of Jewish tourists to Hong Kong. The 4 major incentives, shopping, food, history, and the gateway to China, Hong Kong has provisions for the most varied tastes. No words need to explain the shopping opportunities here. The finest shopping centers and department stores can be compared to Saks Fifth Avenue. But many older American Jews thrive in the old markets off Cat Street, the lane near Possession Point in the streets of Nathan Road. To them, the scurrying, haggling, and cheap treasures are reminiscent of New York's Rivington Street in the Lower East Side in 1900. Food is certainly cosmopolitan, but those who are kosher or at least want a taste of home have many choices. Some dozen delicatessens are situated around Hong Kong, so those with a longing for hot pastrami, bagels, or corned beef are easily satisfied. In October 1991, the Jewish Club opened their kosher restaurant to the public. The King David Room is a full Western menu. All the food is prepared to tradition. The public is allowed to use it at lunchtime from Sunday through Friday. The club also advertises a kosher Cantonese menu with a selection of Chinese dishes, even Indonesian sauté shish kebab, prepared under rabbinical supervision. The little shop here stocks kosher wines, foodstuffs, and bread baked under rabbinical supervision. Actual Jewish historical sites in Hong Kong number only 2, but they are both of interest. The synagogue temple Oil Leah was built in 1902 on Robinson Road. The land overlooking the harbor was donated by Sir Jacob Sassoon. He devoted it to his mother, hence the name Leah's Tent, and it had become a continuous use to this day. Orthodox services are held here each Friday and on the high holidays. The domed 2-storied architectural style is reminiscent of Dutch colonial style. It also resembles the Eastern Sephardic style temple. For while the Sassoons today call the United Kingdom their home, in the early 1890s, they still look to Baghdad as their ancestral dwelling place. The entrance hall, surrounded by 2 towers, is impressive. Within stands a platform from which the scriptures are read. A curtain niche contains the scrolls of the Pentateuch. These scrolls are amongst the most treasured Jewish heirlooms of the community. The casings are from the Middle East, probably sewn at the end of the 19th century. The scrolls themselves were found by a Catholic friar on Cat Street, the Old Market Ladder Street on Hong Kong Island in 1974. Lord Kaduri bought the scrolls for about United States money $5,000 and donated them to the synagogue. The reason for their value is that it is possible, though never proven, that the scrolls came from the Chinese Jewish community Kaifeng. They are therefore not only theologically inspiring, but also historic and intrinsic rarities. The upper story of the synagogue is reserved for women since the traditional Orthodox separation of the sexes is observed. Outside the synagogue, the most fascinating site is the Jewish cemetery in Happy Valley. Happy Valley was the second site inhabited by Europeans after the founding of the territory in 1841. When the first settlers were decimated near the harbor side village, they moved to a more salubrious section, hence the name Happy Valley. Today known mainly for its race course, but is also the location of Catholic, Parsi, and Muslim cemeteries. 5 minutes away is the Jewish cemetery, built in 1857. One enters the cemetery underneath a charming bridge linking 2 sections, a Chinese school. The site itself has about 350 graves which date back to the start of the territory. The birth inscriptions are like a miniature history of Jewish settlements. Settlers came from Poland, Romania, from Chelpona, Korea, the old name for the port of Incheon, from Germany and Rusland, the old name for Belarusia. One family came from Sydney, Australia in 1841. Only rudimentary scholarship has been done on this cemetery, but it is hoped that within a few years, genealogies, inscriptions, and minutiae will be explored and explained. The one commonality for the entire community is the Jewish Club. Originally the Jewish Recreation Club, named after Shanghai's championship soccer team of the 1930s, it was located near the synagogue. Later the club was renamed and relocated on the 4th floor of Melbourne Plaza on Queens Road in Central. There are no divisions in the Jewish Club. Information of the different services and cultural activities displayed along with kosher restaurants, a food shop, sauna, health club, meeting rooms, and a small but choice library. Jewish visitors to Hong Kong can take temporary membership for a minimum fee with use of all the facilities. The club holds a special Shabbos dinner on Friday and a Sunday night barbecue. Historical Hong Kong is mainly concerned with Chinese-British relations, but those interested in the different paths of Jewish civilization in China use the Chinese Jewish Club Library for at least an introduction. Some say that the Hong Kong Jewish community is unique because of its divergences. Like the Tal said one scholar, there are hundreds of threads interwoven into one another. On the high holidays, however, when the synagogues are filled with Jews from around the world, one sees Hong Kong as yet another territory where the Jewish community can practice worship and observe the age-old traditions in freedom. Well, of course, took you from the deep theoretical of Einstein into the most practical vacation tours of Hong Kong. And I hope you enjoyed our little travels throughout the universe today. Thank you very much. Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Matthew Granovetter, who is editor and publisher of the magazine Bridge Today, and also a recent returnee to traditional Jewish life. Welcome to the Jewish View. Can we call you Matt? Feel a little informal.
Thank you,
Matt,
Rabbi.
give us a little bit of a background of yourself. We just said that you're an expert bridge player, you're a pro at bridge, and as I just said that you were raised up in a non-traditional Jewish environment, and now you're can we call you an Orthodox Jew? Or a classic traditional Jew is a nicer language,
well,
and your family is into. Tell us about your background and what. Let's try a little bit about Judaism, how you rode back to Judaism.
Maybe you would call me a modern Orthodox.
Yeah, right.
Whatever that is. Anyway, a modern Orthodox, I suppose, is somebody who is completely of this world but believes in the traditional values and system of Orthodox Judaism.